Good afternoon. Thank you all so much for coming out in this weather. This is just wonderful. I was worried about what kind of an audience we would have, and David said, well, honestly, he's had book signings where 0 people have come, so anything above that was a real plus. So I think this is terrific. My name is Susan Frampton, and I want to welcome you on behalf of the Smithsonian Libraries to the pop-up art of David Carter. This is the 3rd lecture in our series featuring paper engineers and pop-up and movable book historians. The series complements our fantastic exhibition, Paper Engineering, Fold, Pull, Pop, and Turn, which is located in 1 west of this museum. So if you have not seen it yet, make sure you do before you leave. You really don't want to miss it. Fans and critics worldwide agree that David Carter is a paper engineer extraordinaire. Listen to this quote from People magazine in praise of his Bugs in a Box series. Quote, "Mastering the art of paper engineering has turned David Carter into the Steven Spielberg of ascending insects." In the 1980s, David went to work for Waldo Hunt at Intervisual Communications in Los Angeles. Hunt founded Intervisual in the late 60s and was instrumental in reviving the manufacture of pop-up and movable books and promoting many well-known paper engineers. Over the next years, David learned the fine art of paper engineering and pop-up bookmaking. As the mastermind behind the powerful bug phenomenon that began in 1988 with the publication of How Many Bugs in a Box, he has created a series of Bugs books with combined sales of more than 6 million copies. His Easter Bugs, which will be available for buying and signing, and Halloween Bugs were both #1 New York Times bestsellers. His critically acclaimed color series includes One Red Dot, one of my favorites, Blue 2, 600 Black Spots, Yellow Square, and White Noise. And David will, of course, be signing books outside the auditorium after the lecture. You can decide how you want to take questions when, David. We do have microphones at either side for people if they need to. And I personally want to say thank you. I've just spent a wonderful hour with David, but David also let us use, as did Simon, images from One Red Dot for a lot of our publicity for the exhibition, and we're very grateful for that. So please welcome David Carter.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having me. So my name is David Carter, and thanks, Susan. I'm not sure how many of you have had a chance to see the exhibition, but you really need to go over and take a look at it. It's beautiful. They've done a really nice job. There's some books in there that I've never seen, and I've seen a lot of pop-up books, so they did a great job. So my name is David Carter. I'm an author, illustrator, and paper engineer. And usually when there's a bunch of young children, I ask them if they know what an illustrator is. They say yes. Do they know what a author is? Yes. Do they know what a paper engineer is? And that used to stump them, but not anymore. Most everybody knows what a paper engineer is as well now. So that's what I do. That's my living. So what I'll do this afternoon is just do a quick little slide presentation. The first half is not necessarily pop-up. It's just the early part of my career, showing you drawings and paintings and that sort of thing, and then working into the pop-up so we can talk about that. But then what I'd like to do is, once you have an opportunity to see the presentation, is to think of some really good questions. So we'll do a little question and answer when we're finished, okay? Here we go. This is the pop-up art of David Carter. That's me. So the very first picture book I remember was this book, Cowboys and Indians, and I loved it. And one of the reasons I like to show these is because I believe that picture books make a very strong influence on young people. So, and my mother had this. She showed me this book, when I was 30 years old, and said, "Do you remember this book?" And I said, "Yes." And it didn't have a cover on it. I didn't know who the illustrator was so for years and years and years, I kept this book and tried to figure out who the illustrator was. And I eventually found out, and I'll show you that in a minute. And that's the kind of influence picture books have. That's me in Bountiful, Utah, probably in 63 or 64. I was Boy Rogers. The illustrator was Tenggren, Gustav Tenggren, who was an illustrator who did many books for Golden Books, and I just absolutely loved his work. I finally found this book in Books of Wonder in New York City many years later. So growing up in Utah, I used to love all different sorts of things, but dinosaurs was definitely one of the things I liked a lot. This is my first dinosaur drawing. So I've been an artist from the time I was a very young boy. I can always remember drawing and painting and building things as well. And this is a dinosaur I made when I was much older. Yeah. In fourth grade, I met my fourth grade teacher was Miss Howard. This is Miss Howard. We got to go to her wedding, and she was very influential. Miss Howard showed us how to draw. She set up a still life. She put a light on it. It was this jar, an orange. She set the light, turned the lights off in the classroom, explained what we were looking at, and I saw it, and I could draw it. And that's when I realized I'm an artist. I can draw. So this is a very simple image that I made in fourth grade, and you see the highlights and the cast shadows, and just this lesson influenced everything I do. In my junior year of high school, I was in a bad car accident, and spent a year in the hospital where I drew, and I would draw and draw and draw. I had no idea that there was even the possibility of a career as an illustrator, but this is the kind of work I was drawing this is from a sketchbook in high school. By the time I got to college, I was making paintings like this, and it was because of the year in the hospital that I drew. My high school art teacher eventually sent me in the direction of the world of illustration. I went to illustration school and did this kind of work until I ended up in Los Angeles. So at 24 years old, I moved from Bountiful, Utah, a small town in Utah, to the big city of Los Angeles, and starved for about a year. And sort of added in the Los Angeles Times for a freelance production artist, part-time freelance production artist. And I'd never seen a pop-up book before. This was one of the first books I saw, Jan Pinkowski's Robot, and I believe you have it here in the exhibition. It's one of my all-time favorites. I think it's one of the very important pop-up books because it was the first book in the sort of new wave of paper engineering pop-ups that is an original nonfiction pop-up book. Before that, everything was reproductions. They would pick up stories from the public domain. But Jan Pinkowski's Robot, he actually did 2 or 3 at the same time. Robot, Haunted House, Dinner Time. Those were very important pop-up books, and they were very successful. So this book was an inspiration for me. This is the actual spread that you have in the exhibition. I didn't know that, but it's my favorite spread. And this is the kind. So if you don't have this book in your collection, I suggest you take a look at it. Jan Pinkowski's Robot. Next. Oh, I also met my wife in Los Angeles at Intervisual Communications. Her father is a paper engineer also, and it's a very small, close world, the world of paper engineers. This is our wedding invitation. This is the very first pop-up that I made at Intervisual. They gave me the opportunity. They said, what would you do with some Norman Rockwell? So this is my very first pop-up. The book didn't ever happen, but you'll see some of these structures in the exhibition. The piece on the right, on your right here is a very old piece. You'll see it in one of the old, I don't know if it's Nister pop-ups, but it's in the exhibition there. You'll take a look at it. This was a book called Naughty 90s, and in Naughty 90s, it was a fun piece, and you would pull tabs and that sort of thing. But the reason I show you this is the very first time my name ends up in a pop-up book, and I snuck it in. See the pull tab on the right-hand side. You get closer, and I designed the arrow. As we look closer on the arrow, you see the little ornaments on the side. If you look at the right-hand side, you'll see DC. So this is my first signed pop-up book. My very first 2 books are What's at the Beach and What's in the Cave, published in, I think, 1984 or 85. This is the type of pop that's in there. I was using brightly colored paper collage. And about 20 years later, I was making a pop-up book and didn't have a good idea. One of my mottos is, if you don't have a good idea, steal somebody else's. So I stole my own and did the fish again. This is a piece of paper engineering I did for a book that was being created by the designer David Pelham. So I just like to show it because it's a big, complicated piece of paper engineering done in the early 80s, I believe. This is a piece for the Transamerica Tower. So it was one of the first piece of advertising pop-ups that happened in the 80s, and sort of started a new era in advertising and pop-up, which you see some now, not as much as they expected would happen, but you see some. Just a card that I made. And now bugs, onto bugs. This is the very first bug book. It's called Add One Bug. This book was never published, but this was the beginning of the bug series. It was shown to publishers. Nobody liked it. But you can see it was counting. It was actually addition. I was adding a bug every spread. And that turned into how many bugs in a box. After we showed it to publishers, we came back and decided that the counting book the adding book didn't work, but we turned it to a counting book. How many bugs in the box? This was the first bug book. And you'll see, if you take a look at the artwork, the box on the right-hand side is very similar to the drawing I made in 4th grade. It's an actual box with a cast shadow, and that's when I started drawing the bug books. I went back to this drawing, this very first drawing in 4th grade. Alpha Bugs was another one of the bug titles. I'll just quickly show you some of these books. I think now we're up to 33 titles in the bug series. This is how I create my pop-ups. I start by actually drawing on paper, cutting the piece out. So that's the very first step. This is what I show to a publisher, and of course you can see there's notes here, changes, starting to think about color and that type of thing. And from this point to this point is about 6 to 9 months. So that's an actual first proof of the book, printed, the illustrations done, and that's that. Now I'll start. What I'm going to show you here is what evolved out of. One of the things that I started doing is as I make my paper engineering and I'm doing a book, I'm always thinking about 3 different aspects: the actual concept, what the illustrations are going to be, and what the text is going to be. And I try to sort of mesh those 3 together. Quite often it doesn't work. So I'll do a piece of paper engineering. I don't necessarily, it's not going to work for the bug book. It's not going to work in that particular instance, but I like the piece of paper engineering. So I would just sort of put that to the side. And I did that for many, many years. And I eventually got to the point where I had all these fun shapes and forms, and I thought, there's something here. I need to make something with it. So a collaborator of mine, Jim Diaz, who was the creative director who hired me at Intervisual Communications, he and I sat down one afternoon and decided that we should do a book about paper engineering, because there were many books about paper engineering that didn't include paper engineering. They included drawings. And I would have students ask me at school, what do you recommend for a book about paper engineering? And I just kept thinking to myself, there isn't really something good, because a book about pop-ups should have pop-ups in it. So Jim and I went, and based on all these sort of rough bits of paper engineering that he had and that I had, we created what is called the Elements of Pop-Up. And in this book, we talk about how there are probably, I think we came up with 44 individual pop-up structures that the paper engineers then use to combine to make the paper engineering. And so the first thing we show is this complicated, piece right here, and say, doesn't that look complicated? And the answer is yes, it is. But by reading this book and studying this book, you will see that this complicated pop-up is actually made up of the very simple bits of paper engineering. And we go through and talk about each individual type. There's a tent fold. There's a tent fold with pieces attached to it. There's on the bottom left-hand side is a tube with a strap. So we just sort of talk about the 44 basic structures, and then teach you how to make those basic structures, and you can then become a paper engineer. And from this book, once I made the very, very simple structures, I decided, well, what's next? Maybe the next thing to do would be to go the opposite direction, take those very simple structures and make them complicated. And so combining the experimental pieces that I had and just, this is from my studio. I have, just bits of pieces of paper that I like. I don't know why I keep them, but they're interesting shapes and forms, but combined with the basic structures from the elements of pop-up, all the experimental pieces, I ended up building what is now the Red Dot series. And as you see, and you'll see a lot of this, paper engineers normally work with white paper. That's the very first thing we do is build structures in white paper. And I was building these books with white paper thinking, I need, what is going to happen? I know there's a book idea here, I just don't know what it is. And one of my daughters, their class went to the Calder retrospective at SF MoMA, which is the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, and it was the Calder retrospective from Alexander's Calder life, and he was a small boy and had very small little wire pieces all the way to the end, and you walk through this exhibition, and at one point you walk into a room twice the size of this, just absolutely full of Calder's mobiles and structures, and just this huge explosion of color, and I went home and started working in color paper, and that's what led into the Red Dot series. So instead of making my pop-up experiments in white paper, I was now building in color. This is one of the spreads from, what book is this? Blue 2. This is from Blue 2. And you can see how that simple structure, which was the experiment, is turned into this piece. And so now I'm just going to show you some of the experimental pieces. Some of these pieces ended up in books, some didn't. Okay. That's a Calder mobile, obviously. This is a piece that I made in a hotel room with a Swiss Army knife and cutting up a magazine. This is where I got the idea to weave paper. I thought, I haven't seen that before, and that ended up in one of the books. So these are just experiments, and I experimented, and then finally we get to the point where I would pick out 10 structures and put them into a book. The first book was One Red Dot. You have it, I believe it's here in the bookstore. And it's also in the exhibition, isn't it? Yeah, okay. And I started this project by choosing 10 sculptures, 10 pop-up sculptures, and that was it. I didn't know what the concept would be. I just made the sculptures. And at one point, I hit a red dot on this piece right here. And from that, I thought, well, that's kind of a fun concept. I decided to hide a red dot on the rest of the structures. And so this book became about finding the red dot, one red dot. And what I do is I write about the structure once I have the structure in place. So this book is different than other books that I create, where I have a concept and I work with the text and the art at the same time. In this book, I did all the art first, and then just later came in and wrote about what I see. So this is a perplexing puzzle box and one red dot. And these are 2 twisting twirly gigs and one red dot. They spin. This is the woven. So this was inspired by the piece that I made in the hotel room with the Swiss Army knife. Plus, that means that I can tell my dad the basket making class I took in college paid off. And the various pieces. This is 6 fluttering flicker clickers, and this piece makes a lot of noise. You'll see the final book I made was called White Noise, and I just, as I made that book, I just regretted not using this piece in White Noise. But I hadn't thought of White Noise yet, but this piece makes a lot of sound. And this was inspired by, the architecture of Frank Gehry. 8 obedient orbs and 1 red dot, and children will ask, why are they called obedient orbs? Why did you use the word obedient orbs? And I tell them, well, it's because they stayed where I wanted them to stay. 9 nimble 9s, and 10 coiling curlicues. This is the piece that's in the exhibition. Blue 2. So in 1 red dot, because I thought of hiding the dot at the very last minute, I just put 1 dot in each spread, and I tried not to make it too hard. And when I made the Red Dot series, I thought to myself, this is really for adults. In fact, I was very concerned that I would have a hard time finding a children's publisher for it. It worked out that I did find a children's publisher, and then I was concerned, well, are children going to like this? So I showed it to a group of kids in Phoenix, Arizona for the first time, and but halfway through the book, they were saying, too easy, because the red dots were too easy to find. So the second book, Blue 2, it's like, I'll get them. And so I made it very, very difficult to find the Blue 2. So here's the first spread. These are the blossoms, and there's a Blue 2. Can you see the Blue 2 anywhere? Can you? Okay, so, and this is a tough one. What I tell kids, and I've actually had emails from families who bought this book at Christmas and say, okay, we give up. where's the blue 2 on the first spread? And what I suggest to people when they say, where's the blue 2? I say, contemplate the blossoms. That's my only answer. That's all I'll tell them. So this is one of the blossoms. You'll see. I'm showing you where the blue 2 is, okay? And there's the blossom, and under the little lift up on the blossom is the blue 2. So the 2s are well hidden in this book. This is just another structure from blue 2. Wheels and pull tabs. And this is a difficult one to find too. The blue 2 is actually inside one of these cones, and there it is, if you can see it. And it's 2 pieces. You have to line them up just right to see. There's the Caldermobile that you saw earlier. This is a structure. In this structure, there are not only is there a blue 2, but you'll see all the black letters on the outside shape, and each facet of the pyramid spells the name of one of my favorite artists. So I believe this one. Who's this one? I can't tell. This is Duchamp. So those letters will all spell Duchamp, and there are four different sides of 4 different artists. You saw this already. This piece moves back and forth. Okay. This piece, you spin the piece, and the 2 appears by spinning it. Okay. This is just another pop-up structure. I think I used this as a business card. Oh, no, I know what this was. This was on the limited edition of Blue 2. It's the pop-up on the cover. That's what it is. What I do when I make these books now is I keep a sketchbook. So this is my 600 Black Dots sketchbook. And inside the sketchbook are all the ideas and, of what the book will eventually be. I love the sketchbooks. They're probably my favorite part. So there's drawings, and so what I'm doing here is I'll show you a few of the drawings and the sketches. I think Emma did these. I think these are my daughter Emma's drawings, and I think maybe we did this on an airplane when we were traveling, but I just loved the patterns and stuff, and I thought I'd just put them in my book, and somehow these will inspire some pop-up structures. This pop-up this drawing on the right eventually becomes a pop-up. If you look over on the left-hand side, you'll see the little drawing over here that says Chihuly. So that's inspired by the glass work of Del Chihuly. And just some simple, quick, sketches and drawings, and I'll eventually show you the pop-ups that come from those. And here's a drawing, thinking about a mechanic that will, show the hidden red dot. I completely changed that, but I used something like that. This is 500. Notice that's 500 black spots. So that was the original concept. I got to the end and I counted and I realized, 600. So I changed the title, 600 Black Spots. This is the first piece of this. And here what I was trying to do is just do a piece of paper engineering that was the absolute most simple structure I could possibly do. So this is one piece of paper, and it just has to do with the way the piece of paper is cut. This is a fun piece because there's a lot of movement. It feels like grass. So I call it white grass's tip-tap. And tip-tap because as you rock it back and forth, the pieces of the paper touch the base spread and make a little tapping sound. So this comes from the drawing that you saw in the sketchbook. And this reminded me of Mondrian. So there's the drawing. Okay. This comes from the drawing that you saw in the sketchbooks too. And when you pull the 2 tabs, these towers flip-flop, so there's a lot of movement on that piece. This reminded me of a noodle. This is paper noodles in twine. And I always wanted to wrap something. I wanted to be Christo. So I experimented for probably 3 years trying to find materials that would work, wrapping a pop-up, and then you could open and close it. And finally, does anybody recognize these red baskets? For years, I used these red baskets because we like to cook. And I would take the tomatoes out of the red basket and throw the red, this red stuff away. And finally, one day, I took it and I stretched it and I went, oh, there it is. That's what I've been looking for so many years. So it's the container that tomatoes come in from the grocery store. This is my studio. I like it because it's fun and colorful and messy. These are all the spreads for white noise. and I laid them out once they're finished because I just like to, look at all the colors and everything. This is the book White Noise. And the idea here is you will find a sound. So and you're actually finding the piece that makes the sound, but you're trying to find the sound. And I think the cover's fun because if you can, this is corrugated material, and if you rub your finger across the cover makes sound. Oh, this is from Yellow Square. So here you're hunting for a yellow square. This is White Noise. Okay. Inside of this piece is a noisemaker. This is Walt's megaphone, because this piece reminds me of a character that Walt Disney drew. Okay. M&M's, 2 M's. There you go. And now I just have some experimental pieces in here I want to show you. This piece is, there's a book in the exhibition from Bruno Minari. Bruno Minari was an Italian designer and illustrator, and I picked up a book of his in Florence one time and realized Bruno Minari was doing paper engineering. He doesn't call it paper engineering. Bruno Minari called these traveling sculptures. And Bruno Minari maybe did these pop-up structures when I don't know if he'd ever seen pop-ups, because these are so very different than anything I've ever seen before. So this is just a copy of a piece that I saw in the Bruno Minari book, one of his pop-up sculptures. And at one point I thought, boy, I have a really brilliant idea. I think I'll make my pop-ups in metal. I'll make big metal, complicated structures. And as I looked through the Bruno Minari book, I realized that in 1945 he did it first. These are some of my experiments in wrapping the pop-ups. This is a piece of, hosiery. The sculptures were fun, but this material was just too heavy to actually work. So, piece of netting. This piece actually led to the flip-flop piece that actually was in the book. And here I'm experimenting with pop-ups and translucent paper. So inside this box is a pop-up piece, and when it opens, the pieces of paper touch the translucent paper and make this nice effect. These are just some experimental pieces in my studio. These are the kind of things that I'll cut 2 pieces of paper out, put them together, and if I like the way it looks, I pin it on the wall, because maybe at some point I'll eventually use that. And some white paper. So these are white paper structures, but you'll see up on the very top, that pop-up structure is also a piece that is from the Bruno Minari book. Once again, my messy studio. This is one of the pieces from One Red Dot, but it's now turned into a card. So that's a design for a card. This is a pop-up that never was published. This is a pop-up that I made for a Dutch shoe designer named Hester van Augen. This is a pop-up piece that I made for the band Coldplay. This also didn't make it into production, but we're working on some other things, so that will be a possibility at some point. This is the LP. They actually are making LPs, and on the bottom you'll see the CD case. Would you buy that? Would you buy a Coldplay album that had that? And this is a actual sculpture. One of the things I've been experimenting with is moving into the world of kinetic sculpture. So this is a piece I did for one of our local arts organizations that does something called outside the box. So they give you a box and you turn it into something. I put a door on my box, and as you open the box, these discs swirl, they spin. So it's kinetic. This is the second one I made. When you rotate the arm, it spins. This is an exhibition I had of the Red Dot series at a gallery in Roseville, California, and they laid out all the books in a really beautiful exhibition. They did a really nice job. And so I'll just show you a bit of this. This is the largest pop-up I've ever made right in front here. This is 8 feet wide. It's made of cardboard, and which I learned just doesn't hold it very well. This is something that kids could actually open and close. So this was up for 3 months, and I would get called in every 2 or 3 weeks to come and repair this because it would be damaged. So metal, I have to go for metal. I have to get that worked out. This is another large pop-up in front here. It's more of the exhibition. And Dr. Seuss, I thought I'd quickly show you a couple of one project of the Dr. Seuss. I'm working on the 3rd title for Dr. Seuss right now. We did Horton Hears a Who, Oh, the Places You'll Go, and now I'm working on the Lorax. So this is just a quick step-by-step of how I approach a project. So this is Dr. Seuss's The Lorax. There's the title. one of my jobs is to go through the books and determine whether or not it would make a good pop-up book. Well, you look at the Dr. Seuss illustration, it's like, how could that not be good? It's like, can I even, come close to capturing what he did in his drawings? So I go through the book and I do a series of sketches. I do drawings. I do storyboards to try to determine exactly how we're going to make this into a pop-up. So here's the storyboard from that particular spread. I'm giving my instructions. I'm, thinking about it. This is what I show to the publisher. They approve it. And if it works, then that's the actual pop-up I made. And these are now in the process of having the retouchers take the Seuss art and do the adjustments that it takes to make it into a pop-up. So this will be out, I think, about a year from now, in 2012. And then I'll just show you quickly some new work. This is a new title called Hide and Seek. And in this title, it will be very similar to the Red Dot series, but instead of hiding one object, every spread will have many objects. So on this one, there's a fish, there's a white tea, there's reflections, and I'm trying to hide as many objects as I possibly can. I think there are probably 30 objects on this particular pop-up. There's another one, a yellow splat, a car, a red vine, a star. This is actually from the large pop-up I made for the exhibition. The bar down the center causes the pieces to spin, and, once again, many things hidden on this spread. There you go. You can see I'm changing the style just a bit. I'm not only using the basic palette of red, yellow, and blue, but I'm now adding, collage in the background as well. So, and this spread, this is fun. This comes from, this is a word search game, and you'll see just all the letters on this page. There are actually the names of 87 modern artists are hidden here. Let me see if we can see. There's one on the white piece. Let's see if I think we can make this work. All right. See Dine, D-I-N-E. That's Jim Dine. Caro, Anthony Caro. Is it working? No, it's not working. There it is. Anthony Caro is right there. So names of modern artists are hidden within the word search and the structure. There we go. Tuttle, Maholi Nagy. So, all the modern guys. And let me see, what do we have next? Oh, this is a piece that we actually produced for Coldplay. We did 100 of these hand-assembled for a single that they released at Christmas time called Christmas Lights. And this is my studio. This is my daughter Emma when she's much younger. This is my messy studio. I like a messy studio. If it's too clean, it's not creative for me. This is the drawing table that I took out of the trash bin at Intervisual Communications when I first started. I was a starving artist. I didn't have a drawing table. They had thrown this one out, so I took it, repaired it, and it's my lucky drawing table. I'll hopefully work on that till the day I go. And I thought I would just include some fun student work. One of the things I do when I do something like this in museums or in schools is I bring a project and help the kids make it. And so this is some fun sort of creative work that the kids did. And I show them how to make one simple fold here. I show them how to make the simple 90-degree angle fold, then let them go. And isn't that piece pretty incredible? Yeah. Please touch the art. So one of the things I determined, and I had been in Paris. I did a layover about 2 years ago and had a day for myself in Paris on the way to Bologna. Bologna is the International Children's Book Fair where we go sell all the rights. And I decided that I wanted to go see modern art in Paris, and ended up at the Pompidou Center and walked around. And they have some great Calder. They have the original Josephine Baker. They have the Marcel Duchamp bicycle seat and all that type of stuff. So some of the real early things. And in the middle of one of the rooms was this beautiful wire sphere. And I walked up to the sphere and I was looking at it closely, and it was Calder. I could tell it was Calder. And then I looked inside and I could see shapes and forms, and I realized, it's a solar system. And then I followed the structure, and it went down to the center, and I could see there was a handle. And Alexander Calder designed this for us to hold and twist and turn, and it would spin. I could tell. So as I reached for the little handle, I realized, oh, it's all tied with wire, but guards came from all directions. No, don't touch. But I realized Alexander Calder wanted us to touch the art. So I realized that what's so great about pop-up books is we get to touch the art. So that's sort of become my motto, please touch the art. That's what's fun about pop-ups. So this little guy, this is in Japan, he had been touching the art. And these are some more students who, this was in a bookstore in Japan, and they're making the pop-up sculptures. And this is a group of kids in Bologna, Italy, making the pop-up sculptures. And that's the end of the show. So there we go. Ta-da! Thank you. So questions. Who has a really good question for me? Yes, what's your question? When you go to the exhibition that they have here, there's a video, and in that video you'll see some of the imagery of the hand assembly operation. But yes, that's all these books are hand assembled, and for many years they were hand assembled in Colombia. So when I first started in the business, I would travel to Colombia, South America, a small town called Popayan, and they would hand assemble these in big plants. And in Popayan, Colombia, South America, it was considered a really good job, especially in the small village. The company that was a printing company, which is a big international printing company, set up an operation there, and they had schools. They brought the doctor to town. So it was a real nice operation. When I first went, I was terrified. I thought, oh my God, I'm going to South America. I'm going to watch these people working for 34 cents an hour. I'm going to feel terrible. By the time I left Popayan, I couldn't wait to go back. It was this beautiful place. People had a really wonderful life. But they made pop-up books. And the entire village made pop-up books. It was some of the women who worked there had worked there for 35 years. But that plant is closed down now. China. So, any other questions? Yes, what's your question?
I have two questions. One question is about paper and what sort of paper you use and what gets you to switch using from one kind of paper to using another kind of paper, or what keeps you using a kind of paper for a long time.
Yeah.
And what's the difference between the paper that you use when you're mapping out your concepts versus the paper that you use for the final product. And my second question is about attaching things. So glue versus things that are only folded versus things that are sewn or have wires through them.
Yeah.
And what is your sense of the mechanical difficulties or hazards or joys of working with those various techniques? I hate glue, but
yeah. I can ask you a question first. Are you after my job? Okay, because if not, then I'll answer your question. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. Paper, paper is, first off, the paper that we actually use, for the most part, is one brand. It's called Carolina 10-point. And Carolina is, why they use it, I don't know. I don't know why we originally started using that paper, but I use it now because it works. And it has a certain weight to it, and it folds well, it die cuts well, so it has strength. So Carolina is the paper we normally use, and that's what I actually use in my studio too. I actually buy the printer's sheet of Carolina and use that. Although in the colored paper work, I've started using a paper called Wausau Astro Brights, and I use that mostly because of the color of the paper. That's eventually not used in the final book. In fact, what I wanted to do is I wanted to do the Red Dot series using that paper. I wanted to use colored paper, no printing. But the big issue was expense. So expense is also the issue in paper. I think Carolina 10-point is relatively inexpensive. It's what you see in most packaging. Most cosmetic boxes, most CD cases are using this particular paper, Carolina 10-point. Now, my understanding is that they don't always use that now in China because it's because of shipping. So China's using an equivalent paper, and I couldn't tell you the name of it. I've seen some references to the names, but it's based on the structure of Carolina 10-point. Whether it's the fiber size, whether it's the ability to fold, I think that's really what they're after. So that's the key thing. Will the paper hold up? Because some papers are brittle. Some papers, when they fold, the fibers actually break. It makes it easier to tear. So for some reason, this Carolina 10-point works, and that's what we use. As far as gluing, I use good old Elmer's glue, because that supposedly creates the fiber bond that it separates the fibers. They mesh together, and it's just the glue to use. I do know that for years and years and years in Carvajal in Colombia, when they made books, they used white glue also. But now they're using something else. Now they're using a glue in China that will glue through ink, and that's a key thing, because there was a time whenever we made a pop-up, we had to make sure there was no ink at the glue points, which was a whole complicated process of taking little, knocking little areas out that were the glue points. But now they use a glue that glues through ink. I don't know what it is, and I think it's not the typical, white glue. Sometimes I stitch. Sometimes I rarely use wire. I think wire is not a common, treatment. I think it's probably because of safety issues. It's because safety is a big issue. We're always trying to make sure there's nothing in a book that can, harm anybody. In China now, everything has to go through very complicated, testing just to make sure that the books are safe. So string, yes. Paper, yes. Glue, yes. But anything other than that, they have to be very careful with. So did that? If there's any more, just ask me. But that's what I remember from your question. So. Anybody else? Yes. What's your question?
I just want to tell you how much I love your Elements of Pop-Up book.
Oh, thank you.
I've given a few presentations to children and to adults on movable books.
Yeah.
And especially the kids always wanted, the question is, well, how do they do that?
Yeah. Can they make it?
With your book,
right.
I can show them, and they love to have that sort of behind-the-scenes look. When you open it up, you can see how the wheel works.
Yeah.
And things like this.
Thank you.
But my other question is, I'm a cataloger at the Library of Congress.
Okay.
And I've got your book, White Noise, on my desk.
Okay,
and
great. Good.
It's gone from the children's catalogers who said, no, this isn't a children's book, it's an art book.
Yeah.
And then the art catalogers said, no, this isn't an art book, it's about sound.
Yeah.
And because I'm the pop-up person, it's now on my desk.
That's right. Yeah.
And so my question to you is, do you consider it a children's book, an art book, or a book about sound?
Yes.
Yes.
All the above. That means 3 copies. and yes, I mean, that's a great question, and it's a conundrum that's in publishing and in bookstores too. Like, where do these books go? Yeah, I mean, in fact, I'm not sure some of you maybe have seen the little piece in the Post, and we talked about that in that article, and that was so many of these books I think are really for adults. And so many children's books I think are for adults. The illustration style, I know that as a collector, I go into a bookstore, the books I love, maybe my children didn't love. They had a different sort of thing, especially when they were younger. So as far as the Red Dot series, I consider it an art book first. So that's my art. And then, but of course, it's a children's book because I do certain things in the book that I know children will like hiding things, and I know that it's going to be published by the children's division of a publishing company because that's where pop-up books are done. Although I think that it would be great if there was an adult picture book division. I mean, I think that would be the fun way to go. And when books start going away, that might be one division that would keep publishers in business. I don't know, but so that's the answer is all of the above. And by the way, with the elements of pop-up, when we actually did that piece where we opened up the page so you can see inside, that's because for so many years that's how we learned to do paper engineering. And some of the antique pop-up books that you have in the collection here were very similar to the antique pop-up books that Wally Hunt, the man who started Intervisual, would give to me and say, "Take this apart, will you?" And we would look inside to see how it worked, and then we would use those for the reproduction. So that's how paper engineers most often learn. Is the term is reverse engineering. You look to see what someone else has done, but we added it in that book for that reason. So I'm glad the kids use it. Yeah.
One more question.
Okay.
Wally Hunt's books.
Yes.
Is there going to be? I heard at one point there might be a museum, or did they go to a university? Where are his movable books?
Where are they? Yeah, there are some that are at UCLA. I know that for sure. I believe there are some at the LA County Library, too, because at one point, Wally had a big exhibition at the downtown library, and many of the books were donated to the LA County Library or used through UCLA. But the vast majority of his books are in a barn in Springville, California. So, and his daughter's a very good friend of mine. Her husband is my best friend from college. So I have a connection for you. Yeah, and okay, for all of you. But the fact is, so Wally does have a tremendous collection. Supposedly 70,000 books is what they have. But out of those 70,000 books, I think there are some that you might be interested in, some not, because some of the books came from his. If his company manufactured the books, which which is the vast majority of what he has, then he probably would keep 20, 30 copies of each. So that's what they have. They have many, many copies of all the books that his company manufactured. But then his own personal collection, my guess is the good stuff is at UCLA. Yeah, so the Meggendorfers, the old antiques, the Kubastas, the stuff that, and he quite often had 3 or 4 copies of each one of those. That's what we would take apart. He would keep the good ones. So it's all over the place. But the Hunt family, Kimberly Hunt's his daughter, Jim Deasing is her husband. They basically have control of it. And if you're interested, I can put you in touch. But they would love to do something with it. And they were thinking about opening a museum there in Springville. It's just the town's too small. They just couldn't quite make it work financially. So, but they are there. Yes.
Something you mentioned, what appeals to children, just made me think. In this age where apps on the computer, great, digital.
Yes.
Do you find that children react in a different way? In other words, it's not an either or to physical paper.
That's what I think. Yeah, I'm actually doing the app right now. It's almost done. Almost finished. We supposedly released a debate, and I use some of the same concepts that I do in books. So I think these will cross over. I think there'll be children who love physical pop-up books. I think those same children can then move to the right and play some digital information. I think it's both. I think it's all about. What I do is I try to think of myself as a 5-year-old, and what I would have liked, and I would have liked it all. And I especially like the robotics. That fascinates me. So I love to build stuff. So I think it's across the board. It's across the board. It's everything. It's everybody. And I don't pretend to know what kids like, but I do watch a lot, and I use my own inner child to determine what's good. And I would love animation and digital stuff as much as I like paper. And I hope that we always have paper. I hope there's always paper pop-ups. And as far as I'm concerned, I think I'll be doing that for the rest of my life. I don't think it'll go away. The concern is the publishing industry itself. How can these big publishers maintain? Because the way they work is, if you have Harry Potter, then you have a lot of money. You can start doing a lot of projects that may or may not, earn. They still get to publish those books. But if those big print runs that books, slow down or die, that could affect the publishing industry as a whole. So that's the concern right now that I think. Yes.
One of the problems that I had as a children's librarian was the fragility of these books, the beauty of them and the fragility. And do you have any recommendations of material that...
No, it's paper is paper, so it has so many great aspects to it. I can cut it, I can fold it, I can bend it, it can be strong, it can be flexible, but it can also be torn. So and it has it's a natural substance and it falls apart, it decomposes. So we've experimented with papers that are imbibed with plastic fibers. I'm very curious about tie-back and those kind of things, which are non-paper papers. But right now, that's just the nature of the medium. So I don't have a good solution. I wish I did. Yeah. You have a question here.
Good day. I noticed in a lot of your books that you have string as a component. If someone is interested in doing maybe pop-ups and including string,
sure,
and having them as a movable part, how would they learn to do that?
Yeah, I have been including string, And I just have to experiment with it because it's different than the paper. I mean, string does certain things. I mean, I have all different sorts of threads. I use strings that I find at knitting shops, silk string. There's all different types of string, and I just simply experiment. That's all it is. And I usually don't use the string, if you'll notice, as part of the pop-up structure. So I use the paper for the structure. The string is usually kind of a decoration, or in some places I do use it as just a small element of the structure. But it's all about experimenting, because I don't know either. I mean, I started using it in the past 4 or 5 years, and sometimes I think it will work, and sometimes it won't. So I just take it. I mean, I do a lot of experimenting when I'm making the pop-ups. I'll build it, try it, build it again, and eventually something will come that I like. So experiment. Yes.
You built that large cardboard one. I was wondering. I mean, I know from experience I've built something like that too, and it broke.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if there's a way to actually use paper other than recurring to metal or wood or an alternate material. If there's some way to defy that, paper quality breaking or gigantic size.
No, I don't. I don't. And I mean, once again, I tried to experiment with it too. On those paper pop-ups, I experimented with layering. So I use corrugated board, then I put paper on top of that, hoping that one layer would sort of strengthen another layer. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't work. And the other thing about paper is, a piece of paper that's 5 inches tall will do one thing. You make it 10 inches tall, it does something completely different. So no, I don't. I mean, maybe it has to do with how, maybe if you got into the point where you could actually determine how the paper was manufactured, instead of large fibers or, and thickness of the paper, that could help because what you get from paper, there's, different thicknesses. That fine line between paper and board, somewhere in there, but the board doesn't fold as well. It's complicated, yeah. So folding and strength and structure are the issues that we deal with. So I don't know. When Bruno Minari made some of his sculptures that were traveling sculptures, he called them, he used thin plywood and leather, and the leather was the fold. So he would staple, he would attach the leather, and then everywhere it had to fold, he used the leather for fold. So leather for the strength of the fold, and then wood for the structure. Yeah, some kind of combination like that. Any more questions? Yes.
So, can you tell me what titles would be a good gift to give a bright 5-year-old? And
Yeah.
you also have, if you don't have all your books in the bookstore, but you have that one that's Easter. Is that, I didn't look at it.
Yeah,
but is that
I think I saw the books. I think there's Easter Bugs, One Red Dot, White Noise. Three that I saw. For a bright 5-year-old, I would try One Red Dot. It would be fun. You just find a red dot. But Easter Bugs. I really see 2 different categories in my work. Under the bug books are definitely children's books for children, and the very young children. And the other book, the art books, are kind of for everybody, but for young kids. And for a bright 5-year-old, they're going to call it alpha bugs. They don't have to get rid of it, but alpha bugs might be good. Is that it? Okay. Thanks, everybody. Thank you for having me.